On the evening of 6th November 2014, at Auckland International Airport, Terminal 3, South Departure Gate, a passport check was logged at 1942 NZDT. The man passing through was recorded under the name Phillip John Trainer. According to the travel document database, the passport had been renewed in 2013, while the holder was serving a life sentence for murder. Within minutes, he boarded a flight bound for Santiago, Chile. The border exit stamp triggered no alert because no border watch flag had been placed against that identity. At that moment, prison authorities believed the prisoner was still in custody under temporary leave. Only later, after a tourist spotted him at a hostel in Rio de Janeiro and alerted Brazilian police, did it become clear that the man on the plane was the convicted killer known publicly as Phillip John Smith, and that a serious breach of custodial and border controls had occurred. On the morning of 6th November 2014, at Waikato Prison, guards processed paperwork authorizing a temporary release for rehabilitation leave. The approved destination was a sponsor's address in Auckland. At 08:15, an intake officer logged the release form under file number NZC 2014-611. The inmate, recorded as Phillip John Smith, PRN redacted, was handed standard release paperwork. At 08:47, a guard signed the departure log. That same afternoon, at Auckland Central Customs, a man identified by the passport, Phillip John Trainer, passed through immigration muster. No alert triggered. Border control records show a clean departure at 1942. It was only weeks later that authorities realized the rehabilitation leave had become a one-way exit. That day's routine paperwork, once unremarkable, would anchor a multi-agency investigation into one of New Zealand's most serious custodial failures. On 12th of January 1996, in the High Court at Wellington, a jury found Phillip John Smith guilty of murder and prolonged sexual abuse of a child. According to court transcript, WLC 1996 says MYR 045, Smith was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period. The victim of the murder was the father of a boy Smith had been sexually abusing over a period of years, a man who had confronted him about the crimes and paid with his life. The violence was premeditated. Smith had lured the father to a location where he attacked him, ending a life to protect a secret. Correctional files describe Smith as a long-term high-risk offender, serving initially in maximum security with no scheduled parole review until 2014. His psychological assessments from the early years of incarceration painted a picture of a man who understood institutional systems intimately, who studied rules not to follow them, but to identify their limits. One forensic psychologist noted in a 1998 evaluation that Smith displayed an exceptional capacity for impression management, presenting compliance while maintaining internal resistance. In the Department of Corrections registry, his person record number linked all aliases, including his birth name, Phillip John Trainer. This detail, the existence of a legal alternate identity, would prove critical 18 years later. For nearly 2 decades, he remained incarcerated under that PR or F-SON. Prison records from this period show a pattern of surface compliance punctuated by manipulation, what psychologists termed calculated behavior, designed to secure privileges and advancement through the classification system. From 1996 onward, Smith's custodial status was known, stable, and monitored. The prison system records showed no planned release until 2014, when the slow accumulation of good behavior reports began to shift institutional perception. In mid-2014, a routine review of rehabilitation eligibility flagged Smith as potentially suitable for a short-term reintegration program. By this point, his security classification had been downgraded from maximum to low-medium, a progression that had taken years of documented compliance. He attended programs. He engaged with counselors. He presented himself as a model of incremental reform. On 23 July 2013, while still in custody, he successfully renewed a passport, issued in the name Phillip John Trainer. The Department of Internal Affairs processed the application without cross-referencing corrections databases. No mechanism existed to flag that the applicant was incarcerated, let alone serving a life sentence for murder. That document remained valid, tucked away in Smith's possessions, waiting. On 14 October 2014, corrections documentation logged a temporary release request, citing family contact and reintegration assessment. The application named a sponsor in Auckland who would supervise Smith's movements during the leave period. The sponsor was vetted, the address was verified. The paperwork moved through channels. On 4 November 2014, the request was approved by the parole subcommittee. At no point was a border alert requested against Trainer. The system treated the identity on file as valid. No red flag was raised. Temporary release programs in New Zealand prisons allowed certain long-term inmates to reintegrate under supervision. The policy reflected rehabilitative principles, the belief that gradual exposure to society could ease eventual transition. Few recipients had been life-sentenced murderers like Smith. The use of a passport under a different name, though lawful if properly issued, exposed a structural weakness in identity-flagging protocols shared across corrections and immigration. And so the stage was set for what would follow. In the weeks leading up to 6 November 2014, prison logs show Smith participated in internal counselling sessions, work assignments in the prison workshop, and limited privileges under medium security classification. He had earned trust incrementally over years, attending programs, maintaining a clean disciplinary record, engaging cooperatively with case managers. His file thickened with positive assessments. On 2 November 2014, a social worker's report described him as cooperative and compliant, with no incidents. No alerts or misconduct entries appeared during that period. The social worker noted that Smith spoke of reconnecting with family members, of building a foundation for eventual release. These statements seemed consistent with rehabilitation goals. Correctional authorities considered him low-medium security risk. His behavior suggested rehabilitation progress, or at least the appearance of it. At no time did routine monitoring indicate an increased flight risk. Fellow inmates later told investigators that Smith had spoken of looking forward to the temporary release, of breathing fresh air, of seeing Auckland again. The statement seemed unremarkable at the time. Outwardly, the institution and inmate maintained a status quo, reinforcing trust in the approved temporary release. The paperwork was in order. The sponsor was verified. The destination was documented. What no one recognized was that Smith had been planning for months, quietly assembling the means to disappear. The passport in his possession carried a name the border system did not recognize as belonging to a life-sentenced prisoner. He had funds accessible through channels investigators would later uncover. He had researched destinations. The morning of 6 November arrived like any other. Smith collected his release paperwork, walked through the gates, and vanished into the ordinary flow of the day. On the evening of 6 November 2014, at 1942, NZDT, the passport Phillip John Trainer, was scanned electronically by Customs at Auckland International Airport. The automated border system recorded a departure. No manual check was triggered because the passport did not bear any alerts or outstanding warrants. The document was valid. The photograph matched the bearer. According to Customs travel logs, the departure process took 38 seconds. The outgoing passenger boarded flight NZ872 to Santiago via Sydney. Video footage timestamp at 1946 shows a man matching Smith's appearance walking toward the boarding zone. No border guard reacted. He carried only a small bag, the possessions of a traveler expecting to be gone for some time. His movements were unhurried, unremarkable, indistinguishable from any other passenger heading abroad. The border exit passed under standard protocol without additional verification. At that moment, custodial oversight and border control protocols failed to intersect. The corrections database held Smith's PRN and aliases. The immigration database held departure records. Neither system communicated with the other in real time. No alert had been placed against Traynor because no one had requested one. The assumption, unstated, unexamined, was that a prisoner on temporary release would remain within New Zealand. A life-sentenced murderer walked through the gate, and the machinery of the state registered only an ordinary departure. The timestamp became a marker. 1942, the moment when systems designed to contain dangerous individuals failed in plain sight. Smith's route took him first to Sydney, a brief transit, then onward to Santiago. From Chile, he made his way overland and by air to Brazil. Travel records reconstructed later show movement through multiple South American cities over the following days: Buenos Aires, São Paulo, finally Rio de Janeiro. He used the Traynor passport at each checkpoint, each border crossing. The document opened doors across the continent. He withdrew funds from accounts he had established. Investigators would later discover he had been conducting financial transactions from prison using illicitly obtained mobile phones. The phones had been smuggled in through means never fully determined. With them, Smith had maintained contact with the outside world, moved money, researched destinations. The escape was not impulsive. It was the culmination of patient preparation. In Rio de Janeiro, Smith checked into a hostel in the Copacabana district. He moved freely, attended tourist sites, visited beaches. He appeared to be settling into an extended stay, perhaps a permanent one. Brazilian authorities had no reason to flag him. The passport was valid. His behavior attracted no suspicion. To the hostel staff, he was simply another foreign visitor, enjoying the city. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, correctional staff noted Smith had not returned from his temporary release as scheduled. Initial attempts to contact him and his sponsor failed. By 10th of November, alarm had spread through the Department of Corrections. A check of border records revealed the departure under Traynor. The name that had slipped through unnoticed now became the focus of urgent investigation. The manhunt began. On 13th of November 2014, Brazilian federal police detained a man matching Smith's photograph at a hostel in Rio de Janeiro. The arrest came after a New Zealand tourist recognized him from international media reports that had begun circulating in the days following the discovery of his escape. The tourist, staying at a nearby accommodation, spotted Smith at a cafe and contacted New Zealand police through channels that relayed coordinates to Brazilian authorities within hours. The detention log records the name as Phillip John Traynor, the same passport name. Smith offered no resistance when officers arrived. He was calm, cooperative, the same demeanor he had cultivated for years within the prison system. When questioned, he reportedly told officers he had intended to start a new life, to leave his past behind. He seemed unsurprised that the journey had ended. 4 days later, on 17th of November, New Zealand police formally requested extradition. The diplomatic machinery moved quickly. Brazilian authorities cooperated without hesitation, recognizing the gravity of the case. A convicted murderer who had walked out of custody and crossed continents. On 28th of November 2014, they handed Smith over to New Zealand agents at Rio de Janeiro's international airport. He arrived back in Wellington under heavy escort, processed into corrections custody within hours of landing. The passport Traynor, now flagged across international systems, was cancelled. The escape, once brief, had triggered a sprawling international operation involving multiple agencies across 3 countries. What began as routine release ended in one of New Zealand's highest-profile cross-border recaptures. On 1 December 2014, a formal multi-agency review into the escape was initiated by the Ministry of Justice, Immigration New Zealand, Customs, Police, and the Department of Corrections. The review document, titled Summary of Multi-Agency Review of Phillip Trainer, aka Phillip John Smith, was mandated to identify systemic failures that enabled his flight. The terms of reference were broad. How had a life-sentenced murderer obtained a valid passport, secured temporary release, and departed the country without triggering a single alert? Investigators confirmed 3 critical breakdowns. First, passport reissuance while in custody under the name Trainer had proceeded without referral to corrections. The Department of Internal Affairs had no protocol requiring verification of incarceration status for passport applicants. Second, no border alert flag existed against any of Smith's known identities. Corrections had not requested one. Immigration had not generated one automatically. Third, no cross-check mechanism linked the corrections PRN database to passport identity registers at exit points. The systems existed in parallel, unconnected. The review concluded on 25 November 2014, recommending immediate suspension of all temporary releases, pending enhanced border notification protocols. Additional recommendations addressed interagency data sharing, passport controls for prisoners, and alert generation procedures. The escape had exposed structural identity gaps and interagency coordination failures that had persisted undetected for years. What should have been impossible, a life-sentenced prisoner walking through border control, had proven alarmingly simple. The question now was whether the system could be rebuilt to prevent recurrence. Within days of the review's preliminary findings, the Department of Corrections issued interim instructions. All temporary releases suspended as of 11 November 2014. New rules required manual identity verification and cross-agency clearance before granting leave to any prisoner. The suspension affected hundreds of inmates across the country, a sweeping response to a single catastrophic failure. Within 2 months, a permanent policy overhaul mandated that any passport held by prisoners with life sentences or serious convictions be recalled upon release eligibility review. The Department of Internal Affairs implemented new protocols requiring corrections consultation before issuing or renewing passports for incarcerated individuals. The gap that had allowed Smith to obtain travel documents while serving life imprisonment was formally closed. Corrections records show that as of 9 December 2014, the new border alert protocol was active. Every prisoner meeting certain criteria, life sentence, serious violent or sexual offenses, escape history, would now trigger automatic notification to Immigration and Customs. The databases that had operated in isolation were being connected. Institutional protocols shifted swiftly in direct response to the breach. The acknowledgement of procedural vulnerability came without equivocation from officials who testified before parliamentary committees. The system had failed. The system would be rebuilt. What had allowed Smith to walk through the gate, the space between identities, between databases, between agency mandates, was being methodically eliminated. Whether the reforms would prove sufficient remained to be tested. On 28 November 2014, after transfer to maximum security custody, Smith's classification code was amended to high risk, no leave. Intake reports list escape, international flight under misconduct. From that point forward, all movement would occur under shadow watch. Cell assignments changed regularly according to unpredictable schedules, privileges revoked wholesale, No external communications allowed without stringent monitoring and recording. Psychological reports filed in December 2014 note that Smith was now under heightened surveillance. Assessors observed that he remained calm, cooperative on the surface, displaying the same pattern of behavior that had earned him temporary release in the first place. He expressed no remorse for the escape, framing it instead as a rational response to years of incarceration. The difference now was institutional awareness. Every interaction was documented, every request scrutinized for hidden intent. Years after the escape, Smith began pursuing civil litigation from within prison walls. He challenged conditions, policies, and restrictions, testing the boundaries of his confinement through legal channels with persistence that matched his earlier manipulation of release protocols. On 16 May 2024, the Court of Appeal rejected his challenge against a policy banning sexual activity in special treatment units, finding no discrimination under the law. The judgment noted Smith's history and the appropriateness of restrictions given his offending. Meanwhile, on 10 July 2024, police confirmed they had opened a fresh investigation into complaints from the public against Smith. Though they would not disclose the nature of the complaints, the investigation remained ongoing as of late 2024. During a July 2024 parole hearing, it was revealed that 2 contraband mobile phones had been found in his cell during routine searches, along with a cigarette lighter concealed in a porridge packet, clear breaches of the Corrections Act. The phones represented not merely rule violations, but potential continuation of the same external connectivity that had facilitated his escape and subsequent financial crimes. That misconduct triggered an upgrade of his security classification from low-medium back to high. Even under maximum containment, Smith continued to challenge institutional controls, prompting renewed scrutiny from correctional staff and parole authorities alike. The pattern persisted across decades, surface compliance masking ongoing transgression. Court records from 2023 revealed the full extent of Smith's ongoing criminal activity while incarcerated. He pleaded guilty to 19 charges of dishonest use of documents related to illicitly claiming COVID-19 business support payments while still serving his life sentence. He had also falsified GST and income tax returns, creating fictitious business activities to generate fraudulent claims against pandemic relief funds. The scheme required external coordination, digital access, and financial infrastructure, all maintained from within a maximum security facility. Smith had exploited the pandemic's emergency provisions, the same crisis that strained institutions worldwide. Investigators traced the fraud through bank records and digital footprints, building a case that demonstrated sustained criminal enterprise conducted from a prison cell. He was sentenced to 24 months imprisonment to be served concurrently with his existing life sentence and ordered to pay $53,593.41 in reparations to the Crown. At subsequent parole hearings, the board cited this conviction as evidence of his continuous breaches of prison regulations and persistent dishonesty. Even in custody, Smith's criminal activity continued, complicating any assessment of rehabilitation beyond recovery. The phones found in his cell had served purposes beyond personal communication. He had been trading cryptocurrency, conducting financial transactions across digital platforms, and exploiting pandemic relief systems designed for struggling businesses. Containment had not meant cessation of criminal conduct, only adaptation of method. On 11 November 2025, during his 18th parole hearing, Smith addressed the board via audiovisual link from his maximum security cell. The hearing had been scheduled as routine, another in a long series stretching back to 2014. Smith appeared composed, prepared. He had submitted written materials in advance, outlining what he characterized as personal growth and institutional engagement. Under questioning, he admitted to having possessed the contraband mobile phones for approximately a year before their discovery. When board members pressed him on their purpose, he offered an explanation that seemed designed to minimize culpability. He stated he had educated himself on binary options trading in cryptocurrency and had begun implementing strategies with real money on a small scale, testing approaches, learning systems. His security classification remained high. The next review was scheduled for late 2026. Despite 30 years inside New Zealand's correctional system and intermittent claims of reform and insight, institutional decision-makers judged him an undue risk to the community. The accumulated record spoke clearly. Temporary compliance, followed by calculated transgression, repeated across years, across systems, across international borders. On 11 November 2025, after 3 decades in New Zealand's custodial system, prison records show that the passport, Phillip John Trainer, remains cancelled, voided across international databases, flagged in systems that once failed to notice it. The PRN remains active, linking Smith's identities across correctional records that now span his entire adult life. On Corrections' internal database, he is logged as high risk, no temporary release, a classification unlikely to change. The same identity document that facilitated his escape in 2014 now stands as void, a permanent marker of institutional error corrected too late, and of individual calculation that exploited every available gap. The multi-agency reforms implemented after his escape remain in effect. Passport applications from prisoners now trigger automatic review and cross-referencing with correctional databases. Border alert protocols connect systems that once operated in isolation. The gap he exploited has been closed, or at least narrowed to the point where similar escapes would require circumventing multiple redundant safeguards. Smith remains in custody, his minimum parole period long since served, but release repeatedly denied on grounds of ongoing risk. The documentary record, court transcripts, parole board decisions, misconduct reports, fraud convictions, psychological assessments, forms an unbroken chain from 1996 to the present day. What began with a murder committed to conceal child abuse continued through manipulation, escape, international flight, recapture, and ongoing criminality conducted from within prison walls. The border checkpoint at Auckland International Airport processes thousands of departures daily. Passengers queue, present documents, pass through electronic gates, and board flights to destinations around the world. The process is routine, unremarkable, designed for efficiency. On the evening of 6 November 2014, one of those departures took 38 seconds. A passport scanned, a gate opened, a flight boarded, the timestamp, 1942 NZCDT, would become the fulcrum of a multi-agency investigation, a marker of systemic failure, and a catalyst for institutional reform that continues to shape New Zealand's correctional and border control policies. The passport that cleared that checkpoint carried a name the system didn't recognize as dangerous. The man who held it had been planning for months, perhaps years, studying the spaces between agencies, the gaps between databases, the assumptions embedded in routine procedures. He understood that institutions often fail not through dramatic breach, but through quiet disconnection. The left hand unaware of what the right hand holds. He walked through that disconnection and emerged on the other side, briefly free. Today, that passport is cancelled. The bearer remains incarcerated, his parole denied, his classification fixed at high risk. The reforms implemented in 2014 persist in policy manuals and system architectures. But the timestamp endures in the documentary record, 942 NZAT, a reminder that systems are only as strong as their connections, that identities can slip through the spaces between names, and that 38 seconds of routine processing can become the centerpiece of a national reckoning with institutional failure. The gate has closed. The record stands.